Buongiorno a tutti. Come vedete qui e lì anche le cose super tecniche non funzionano. Allora, io nel nome del rettore che non può essere presente perché sta a Gerusalemme, vorrei dare un grande benvenuto a tutti che siete arrivati e molti di voi anche da veramente lontano. E anche vorrei dare benvenuto a tutti quelli che ci seguono online. Prima di cominciare vorrei dire una parola di grande benvenuto a professor Pietro Bovati, che ha gestito questo seminario per tanti anni. Veramente Pietro, tante grazie per tutto il lavoro che hai fatto per noi. E questo è per primo anno, per la prima volta, quando il seminario sarà gestito, organizzato da Padre Ska. Qui un grande grazie a Padre Ska per il lavoro che fa. E lui ha incaricato alcuni dei nostri professori, specialmente Leonardo Pessoa, che ha organizzato tutto il convegno, ha scelto in collaborazione con altri i professori. Quindi tante grazie, spero che siete arrivati e spero che questa settimana sarà una settimana molto...
Buongiorno a tutti quanti, grazie tante di essere venuti. Mi associo a tutti i ringraziamenti di Padre Dubovski, specialmente anche a tutti coloro che hanno preparato. Infatti io sto dietro nelle quinte e il lavoro è stato fatto specialmente da Leonardo, da Federico Giuntoli e tanti altri, e ringrazio nello stesso tempo anche il nostro segretario Carlo Valentino e il suo Sergio Buccaioni. Lo scopo dico una parola soltanto sullo scopo di questo seminario e poi introduco il professore Tov, no? A chi lascio la parola, è la cosa molto più importante. Sì, perché fare un seminario sulla critica testuale e la critica letteraria? È una domanda fondamentale. Noi studiamo il testo, specialmente quando si parla di studi cosiddetti sincronici, si parla del testo nella sua forma finale. Il testo nella sua forma finale dove si trova? Si trova qua. Ecco, è la Bibbia di Stuttgart. Aspettando la Bibbia di Gerusalemme. Ma la Bibbia di Stuttgart certamente non è un autografo. Allora, dipende quasi interamente da un manoscritto, quello di Leningrado, 1009. E allora ci possiamo chiedere, ma che cosa è accaduto durante i più di 1000 anni fra il codice di Leningrado e le origini del testo biblico? Dove era e da chi dipende il codice di Leningrado? Era l'unica versione del testo? C'erano altre versioni del testo? Sì o no? Questa è tutta la domanda che vorremmo porre in questi giorni e alla quale vorremmo apportare qualche elemento di risposta. Adesso due parole per introdurre il professore Tov, che conoscete molto bene. Ecco, non è la prima volta che viene qua al Biblico e quindi siamo molto felici di poter accoglierlo un'altra volta. Bene, è nato a Amsterdam, nei Paesi Bassi, ecco, e poi è emigrato in Israele nel 1961. Bene, ha fatto la sua tesi di dottorato a Gerusalemme. Lo prepara certamente a studiare la critica testuale perché lo fa sulla traduzione della Septuaginta di Geremia e di Baruch, no? The Septuagint Translation of Jeremiah and Baruch. È stato professore, è stato invitato a insegnare in tutto il mondo, ecco, dalla Svezia al Sudafrica all'Australia, dagli Stati Uniti fino al Giappone. E non cito tutti i paesi dove ha insegnato. Partecipa per il momento adesso al Hebrew University Bible Project, che sarebbe una edizione della Bibbia basata soprattutto sul codice di Aleppo, il concorrente di quello di Leningrado. E di cui parleremo giovedì. Ecco, faccio un po' di pubblicità per chi sarebbe tentato di partire. Poi evidentemente anche capo dell'edizione degli manoscritti di Qumran, Dead Sea Scrolls. Ecco, adesso lascio la parola al professore Tov. Ecco, grazie tante dell'attenzione. Thank you very much, please.
Buongiorno. Thank you very much, Professor Ska, for your words of introduction. I would have wanted to bring you the weather of Jerusalem, which is 20 degrees now. My lecture is very basic about textual criticism, and some of you in the audience are experts yourself. So you know these things, but I hope you will challenge me in your questions. Textual criticism is a discipline applied to the textual traditions of all written sources. Textual critics focus on the various texts of a composition by conducting an analysis of its ancient and medieval manuscripts as well as its modern printed editions. This analysis is complex in the case of the Hebrew Bible because of its labyrinthine written transmission over the course of at least 2,500 years and possibly several centuries more. The analysis pertains to an investigation of the Hebrew text, especially the ones from the Judean desert, as well as their medieval Masoretic sequels, and several ancient translations that were made from Hebrew texts that differed from those known to us. The Septuagint, LXX, in Greek, Psita, Syriac, the Targumim, in Aramaic, the Vulgate in Latin. All these are branches of the Bible text. Beyond these introductory remarks, no further explanations are needed regarding our dealing with textual criticism. The very fact that the scripture text has been preserved in many formulations necessitates the involvement of textual investigations. An analysis solely of the central biblical text, the Masoretic text, and I will call this MT, does not suffice because MT provides only one part of the textual evidence. The internal textual variation within the books of MT is a further incentive for textual analysis. Textual scholars consider it their task to analyze all the known ancient and medieval texts, because the exegesis of the Hebrew Bible should be based on the totality of the available texts. The details in the manuscripts are called readings, and I saw that in Italian this is lezioni. The convention in scholarship is to compare the readings of MT with those of the other sources that are named variant readings, varianti. The purpose of this comparison, also named evaluation, is a search for readings that exegetes may wish to use in their scripture exegesis, because the discipline of textual criticism provides dates for exegesis. The modern version of textual criticism is challenged by the need to determine the relation between textual and literary criticism. Scholars often try to define the one reading from which the other readings developed, although not all readings are subjected to this process. This reading is often named the early, initial, or original reading, but the definition of that early reading meets many challenges. Textual criticism is a discipline, but at the same time it's also an approach. The same words can be approached in different ways. Thus, the first three words of the Bible, Bereshit bara Elohim, may involve linguistic examination, philosophical and theological considerations, and it also includes textual aspects. I focus mainly on the textual features, but I don't forget the exegetical aspects, because textual critics examine and compare readings based on exegetical arguments. Further, textual criticism does not stand alone. It places results into the hands of exegetes. Since it expresses a view on all readings, by necessity it turns to several disciplines, such as linguistic, historical, geography, history, stylistic, literary criticism, and knowledge from each of the languages and cultures of the ancient translations. So I have some examples that I just want to mention to you in order to show what is a variant. And the first one is from the first words of the Bible. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim et haaretz. So the first word, the second word is bara. And the usual understanding is, as in King James, in the beginning God created. But some translations read the second word as bro, the creating. So that's in the beginning of the creating, such as the medieval Jewish commentator Rashi. And so then this involves a different reading of the vowels. And so you have a variant reading tradition, which you see in a translation. And I think this is also shown in your Italian text. The NRSV has a different understanding. So this is actually a kind of a variant. So in the NRSV you have in the beginning, when God created. That's a very interesting understanding. It's not like we said in the beginning God created. And likewise, the JPS translation, when God began to create. It's not like we normally say, in the beginning God created. Please note these different understandings which cycle through in the translations already. This is modern textual criticism. This is modern exegesis. And for this modern understanding, please note in your translation, Genesis 5:1, Ze Sefer Toldot Adam, B'yom Bro Elohim. This is the basis for this understanding. Example number 2, 1 Samuel 1:22. And you have 3 columns. I start from the right one. And this is MT. But MT in the translation of the JPS. JPS usually gives the MT. And you see, this has a blank at the end. It ends with, he must remain there for good. But if you go to the most left column, and that left column is 4Q Sam A, that's a Qumran scroll. And there you have in black at the end an addition, a plus. And the plus is, I will dedicate him as a Nazarite forever, all the days of his life. So a translation, a modern translation, no, that's in the middle column. The Samuel scroll has a plus. And a modern translation, that's the NRSV, adds that detail. This is a variant. A modern translation adds that variant in the Bible text. So if you were to use this Bible text in the church, you are reading a Dead Sea Scroll in the church. It's not the Masoretic text. Very important to realize that if you use all the different English versions in the church, you are using sometimes the Masoretic text, and sometimes you're using the Dead Sea Scroll in the church. And under this you have the text in Hebrew. And the text in Hebrew has at the end, Unetatiu Nazir ad Olam. And my explanation, you have in 1 Samuel 1:22, Hannah describes the future of her son Samuel in general terms. However, in an exegetical variant, 4Q Sam A, he is named a Nazarite, as he is in the LXX. LXX is Septuagint of verse 11. This variant has been accepted in the NRSV and the NAB, but not in the JPS and most English translations. This is quite unusual. Example 3. Masoretic text. ותעלהו עמה כאשר גמלתו בפרים 3. I start with column on the most right. And this is in English. And this is English as the Masoretic text. When she had weaned him, she took him up with her along with 3 bulls. Now I go to the column to the left. This is 4Q Sam A, Qumran scroll. And the Qumran scroll is different, along with the 3-year-old bull. So not with 3 bulls, but with 1 bull, but a bull of 3 years old. And again, we have a modern English translation that has accepted the Qumran reading. Again, if you use this in the church, you're using a Qumran scroll in the church. My explanation, in verse 24, as in verse 22, the NRSV reflects a non-Masoretic source, including a variant, a 3-year-old bull against 3 bulls of MT. The NJPS remains loyal to MT, although it adds a note. The Septuagint and 4Q Sam A read a 3-year-old bull and bread. And this came through an inner Hebrew variation, par meshulash or parim shlosha. I cannot show this exactly on the screen, but this is basically the same consonants. Textual critics also study the intricate developments of the ancient texts from the first copy onwards until the printed text. Textual criticism as practice in 2023 has modern aspects, which we will address at the end of our study. Sources. In your study and teaching, you should have an open mind towards the text of the Hebrew Bible. That text is not found only in MT, but everywhere. In the few examples given above, readings from MT and other sources were quoted and analyzed. When we compare these readings, we will find that some of them are better, more appropriate in their context than others. But we haven't yet defined what that implies. All these readings are found in biblical texts that witness to the text of the Hebrew Bible. This leads to a follow-up question. Which sources do we have in mind when referring to the text of the Bible? Is that source or those sources represented by the MT, the LXX, the Vulgate, Pshita, or the Samaritan Pentateuch? Or, since all these texts are evidenced in relatively late witnesses, should we look at Hebrew texts found in the Judean desert? There are no clear answers, and various responses are expected when you turn to religious and scholarly circles. Within religious circles, Jews, Catholics, Protestant, Orthodox Christians, and Samaritans have different views on the authoritative text of the Bible, and it's not easy to summarize these positions. Since scholars have an open mind for all texts of the Bible, for them there is no such thing as the text of the Bible. Even though they commenced their journey with MT. Hence, the printed editions of the Hebrew text of the Bible, all of which reflects a version of MT, do not contain the text of the Bible, but rather a text of Hebrew scripture. The LXX also contains such a text, since it contains a text form that had been and still is accepted as authoritative by a community. At first a Jewish community, subsequently the Christians, and now the Orthodox Christians. The Samaritan community continues to live by the text of their own Pentateuch, SP, that means Samaritan Pentateuch, which differs from the Jewish MT. The various Qumran scrolls were also authoritative for the Qumran community, since they owned the scrolls and quoted from them, even though they differed from one another. The reply to the core question, where is or are the texts of the Bible to be found, is thus that all these texts together and each of them separately reflect the text of the Bible. The text of the Bible is no more than an abstract entity, since the biblical text is represented by all authoritative representatives of the Bible or translation. So, what are the sources of the Bible? So first we have the Masoretic text, and I sometimes click on my PowerPoint. I don't have too many slides, but here you have a sample of the Masoretic text. For many Bible readers who are accustomed to consulting MT, that text is for them the Bible. However, at this point in the discussion, we need to be more specific, because there are different forms of MT, and we have to see which branch of MT we have in mind. MT is the main text of the Hebrew Bible used today, while prior to the 1st century CE, it was merely one of several texts used by the Jewish people. In modern time, MT is found everywhere. Even if you don't know where it is, you can't miss it, because it's found everywhere. The name Masoretic text refers to a group of manuscripts that are closely related. Many of the elements of these manuscripts, including their final form, were determined in early Middle Ages, but they continue a much earlier tradition. This name was given to the group because of the apparatus of the Masorah. Attached to it. This apparatus, together with the vowels and cantillation marks, was added to the ancient consonantal text block between the 8th and 11th centuries, the main developments occurring at the beginning of the 10th century. A first step in analyzing MT is a description of the elements of which it is composed. 5 elements. The consonants, that is the dots under the letters and above. That's the letters. So that's Breshit. Then the paratextual elements. In the slide that's on the right column, space towards the end of the spacing, towards the end of the right column. That's a paratextual element. Or in the most left column, the space 6 lines before the end. That's a spacing in the middle of the line. But these are just examples. then vowels, under and above the letters, then cantillation marks, under the letters, and then the masura. The masura you see on the top of the sample, 3 letters, 3 lines in petite letters, and in the bottom 2 lines of petite letters. This is just a sample, because in other manuscripts these letters are shaped in beautiful shapes. And it's also, this is one form of the masura, that's the large masura, and the small masura is in the margins, in the middle between the columns. These are just a few small letters. The masura is a product of the early Middle Ages. The central features of MT are the exact replica of the proto-Masoretic text, I call that proto-MT, through the Middle Ages until the printed editions. The sanctification of the complete text block or the early text, including the smallest details, and the diversity of the textual features of MT in the various books. The full-fledged medieval MT thus is a 2-layered text. The principal component of MT, that of the letters, was in existence more than 1,000 years before the Middle Ages. The fact that this text was so preserved so well is, in a way, a marvel, a man-made marvel. Second text is the Septuagint, which I just show. There will be a full lecture on the Septuagint. I will therefore point out only a few details. Most translation units reflect the original Greek translation, so-called Old Greek, while some reflect later anonymous revisions. When analyzing books of the Septuagint, one needs to take this variety into consideration. The collection of Greek scriptures contains Greek versions of all the books of Hebrew Scripture. These Greek versions contribute significantly to the study of the Bible, especially to understanding its textual transmission and exegesis. Among the ancient translations, the Septuagint holds pride of place for textual critics, since it reflects a greater number of variants than all the other translations put together. Textual differences between the LXX and the other witnesses of the Hebrew Bible, reconstructed as variants vis-à-vis these sources, are found in all the scripture books. Variants reconstructed from the LXX are actively used in the textual praxis. Excellent translations of the Septuagint in the European languages can be used as a source of information, but sound textual analysis can only be based on the Greek data themselves. The analysis of the character of the Septuagint in the various books indicates that they share only a limited number of features. The books of the LXX share more literary variants compared with MT than the other sources. The books of the Septuagint of the Torah share many harmonizing pluses resembling those of the SP, the pre-Samaritan scrolls, and other sources. The character of the Hebrew source underlying the LXX changes from book to book, and I've written in table number 1 some examples of my characterization. It's a personal view of some literary differences in Genesis. For example, in chapters 5 and 11, the chronological and genealogical differences. These are major differences in numbers, in Joshua, transpositions, pluses, minuses, and theological difference. These are major differences. In 1st and 2nd Samuel, textual and literary differences. So, textual, small differences, literary differences, large differences. In the Song of Hannah, large differences. In the story of David and Goliath, major differences. You have to know these things. And in 1st and 2nd Kings, large differences. First Kings I consider in Greek, I consider to be a midrash, an exegetical edition, but that's my view, because other scholars have a different view. And 2nd Kings, major differences between the Septuagint, chronological differences. For example, between the Alexics and the Masoretic text. My suggestion, whenever possible, consult the Alexic in Greek or English. Please consult the so-called NETS translation. I have here the reference. Or about Italian, I don't know, but I have to find out the exact reference for the Italian. The Samaritan Pentateuch, SP, the Holy Writ of the Samaritan community, is comprised solely of the Torah, dating apparently from the 2nd century BCE. SP, like MT, is known from medieval manuscripts, dating from the 11th century CE onwards, and undoubtedly goes back to ancient texts. The Israelite Samaritans are closely related to the Jews, but SP is not considered a regular Jewish text, or one could say it's no longer a Jewish text. Remarkably, 2,000-year-old Qumran scrolls include several non-sectarian texts that closely resemble the medieval SP. This goes to show that early representatives of these texts were considered authoritative Jewish texts, since these Qumran texts were not Samaritan, and there is no evidence of Samaritan presence at Qumran. These predecessors of SP found at Qumran, named pre-Samaritan, share all the major and minor features with SP. Among other things, the new text was meant to emphasize the importance of Mount Gerizim as the center of worship. The fact that one of these pre-Samaritan texts was used as the base for the SP is not coincidental, since texts of this type were probably commonly accepted in Palestine. The fact that one pre-Samaritan scroll, 4Q Paleo-XM, and the medieval SP are written in the Paleo-Hebrew script renders them an appearance of originality, since virtually all manuscripts of Hebrew scripture are written in the later square script. The SP, I jump a few lines. How do you say jump?
Saltare.
Saltare, okay. Saltare. The SP is a popular text that removes difficulties from the context, harmonizes with other verses, and also edits the content in certain passages. The other translations, Pshita, Targumim, and Vulgate, are covered by other lectures. Dead Sea Scrolls, slide 7. The Dead Sea Scrolls are also covered in another lecture, but they are so important that I will add a few points. And I show here a slide just showing you the various components of a regular scroll. This is the Isaiah scroll, so you can see what a column looks like and the various internal aspects of the various internal scribal aspects of such a column. The term Dead Sea Scrolls is misleading, as it implies a limited milieu for the scrolls. However, the Qumran scrolls represent a broad spectrum of biblical and non-biblical writings created and copied in ancient Israel, and they should therefore be considered the scrolls of ancient Israel. Likewise, the biblical scrolls found at the other sites in the Judean desert were not copied there, neither at Masada, nor in the caves used to stow the scrolls from the time of the second Jewish revolts. Therefore, most aspects of the description of the Dead Sea Scrolls pertain to the entire land of Israel, and not only to the Essenes, Qumran, or the Judean desert sites. Until the middle of the 20th century, the Hebrew Bible was known only from medieval Jewish codices that provided one-sided information on the content of the Bible, because at that time the only text that was current was the MT. The full spectrum of information on the Hebrew text of the Bible thus was not available, since in antiquity several additional forms were current in Israel. MT is a good text, enriched by several layers of data in the early Middle Ages. The notion that MT was the only surviving Hebrew text from antiquity to MT, in addition to SP, came to an end in the middle of the 20th century, when a large treasure trove of Hebrew scrolls was found in the Judean desert, mainly at Qumran, dating to the period around the turn of the Common Era. Earliest sources of the Hebrew Bible. We don't know when the oldest scripture books were first inscribed, but scripture itself contains stories about some early copies. The writing of a first and second scroll of Jeremiah's words in Jeremiah 36. A copy of the Torah found in the temple at the time of Josiah, according to 2 Kings 22. Beyond these traditions, we have no tangible scripture evidence from any of these centuries. Before the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, the oldest Hebrew evidence for the Bible derived from the Cairo Geniza. Psalter. New data. Under this heading, I will briefly deal with the importance of the new sources that have made an enormous impact on the practice of textual criticism, Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls, especially the scrolls from Qumran, contribute much to the research of the Hebrew Bible in the following areas. The scrolls provide an early witness to scripture exegesis. 2. Thousands of readings in the Judean Desert Scrolls, not known previously, help us to better understand the complexities of the biblical text. 3. The sectarian Samaritan Pentateuch was known from its early medieval copies, but the presence of early non-sectarian forerunners of that text among the Qumran scrolls was a total surprise. 4. It was a pleasant surprise to find texts in the Judean desert that are virtually identical to the consonants of the medieval Masoretic text. These texts were described as Proto-MT. 5. The reliability of the reconstruction of the Hebrew source of the ancient translations, especially the LX6, is supported much by the Qumran scrolls. 6. We now know much about the biblical text from Qumran in a form that we describe as textual variety. 7. We now know much about the external appearance of the scrolls in early centuries, such as I show here on the screen. We know what the scrolls look like. 8. The Dead Sea Scrolls offer many data that are important for the analysis of the biblical text. However, in the final decision regarding the early text, the periods when these texts were written is not taken into consideration, but rather the abstract finished literary product of each of the scripture books. As a result, when you deal with the scripture text, you need to have an open mind regarding the text that you want to present as the best Bible text in your exegesis. It may be empty, the Septuagint, or one of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is not a religious matter, since, as far as I understand, the religious instructions leave things open. I already gave examples of variants in the scrolls in the beginning of this paper. The Qumran scrolls can be consulted in the DJD editions, in the edition of Eugene Ulrich, and on one of the websites on the internet. All these websites are commercial websites, but the images are freely available. LX6, there are many new data that have come to light in the 20th century. The new aspects of the Septuagint are not new manuscripts, but new understandings. First, we now understand that certain parts of the LX6 do not reflect the Old Greek, but a later revision. And second, we now understand that several segments in the Septuagint reflect earlier stages in the development of the scripture books than MT. Masoretic text. Even with regard to MT, there were new data. The proto-MT, the earliest layer of MT, had been known indirectly before the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, but not in a Hebrew garb. The discovery, Saltara, the discovery of 19 Hebrew scrolls identical to the medieval Masoretic text brought about an innovation in terminology. Before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, there was no special term for the Masoretic text, dating to the period before the Middle Ages. But however, when texts almost identical with the medieval MT were identified, the term Proto-Masoretic was coined. Saltara. The virtual identity between the early scrolls and the medieval text can be recognized based in an examination of the text recorded in Table 2. So here I give some examples of text, a phylactery from Rabat, the Engedi scroll, Leviticus scroll from Masada. These fragments are identical with the medieval text, and this is a marvel that the Masoretic consonantal text was already found in the Judean desert 2,000 years ago. It's even important, if I dare say, from a religious point of view, but also, obviously, also from a scholarly point of view, that the Masoretic text was found 2,000 years ago in those places. 5. Practice of textual criticism. The analysis of textual sources should be the first step. Often this is done by opening a critical edition. When the contents of the non-Masoretic witnesses, including the Judean Desert Scrolls and the Septuagint, are often underused in commentaries and introduction, the exegete is expected to use these data within the exegetical procedure. However, when turning to textual data, problems pile up to such an extent that some scholars shrink away from using them. These problems are visible both at the theoretical end and at the practical level. Which variants should be integrated into the exegetical activity and how? At both levels, there are no firm answers and no generally accepted views. The practice of textual criticism is born out of a need to understand the totality of the textual evidence. Saltare. Textual criticism proper is subdivided into 2 stages: the collecting of readings and the evaluation of readings. Saltare. The next stage is that of the comparison of readings. The purpose of this comparison is the search for the early reading that scholars may wish to use in their exegesis, because textual criticism provides data for their discipline. Scholars often try to define as the early reading the one reading from which the other reading developed. Due to complications, the entire early text cannot be reconstructed. Traditionally, the readings of MT are compared with those of the other texts. Variance is a formal term that does not imply that they are inferior to MT. However, due to MT's central position in Judaism and Christianity, its monopoly among the printed editions, and its overall good quality, it is often preferred as the best text by default when making textual decisions. However, in each individual decision, all texts are treated as being of equal value. The comparative evaluation of readings described above is necessarily subjective. Saltare. I suggest that common sense is the scholar's main guide when attempting to locate the contextually most appropriate reading. Obviously, scholars will use a maximum of arguments that are as objective as possible in order to attempt to convince scholars regarding the priority of readings. What guides do we have? What guides do we have? There are different kinds of guides. I mention here my own introduction. However, I feel the best guidance is provided by university courses, like given at this university by Leonardo. Sample readings for evaluation. Genesis 2:2. On the 7th day, God completed the work. SP on the 6th day. LXX on the 6th day. According to MT, God completed his work on the seventh day, involving a millisecond of work. Thus Rashi. However, some scribes, and possibly translators, probably found it difficult to imagine that God would have worked on the seventh day, and therefore corrected the presumably primary reading to a theologically easier one. According to this reasoning, the reading of SP and the LX6 is secondary. This is an example, and you read this example with my subjective answer. I may be right, I may be wrong. There are other views, because I don't give you all the data here, but there are also modern translations that disagree, and that print in the modern translation that God completed his work on the sixth day. So they disagree with me. And they follow the text of the Samaritan Pentateuch and the Septuagint. There is no right and no wrong way. This is our field. There are some objective parts and there are some subjective parts. How many minutes do I still have?
10 minutes more.
Okay. In the second case, it's also, well, this is not a variant. This is a difference between two parallel cases in MT. The country, or the people, mentioned in Genesis 10:4 are called Dodanim. The same people are mentioned Dodanim. It's a well-known crux. Which is the right one? And also, so this is within MT, but you also have ancient translations. Which is it of the two readings is to be preferred? Should I say I prefer Dodanim, comparing this name with the Greek tribe Danaoi? Should I say Rodanim in this region, the Isle of Rhodos? There is no right or no wrong. You have to pick your own choice. It's not a variant, but my view is clear. You have to make a choice, but you're never sure. So in this way, I have another example. And now we come to text editions and new tools. Textual criticism involves many practical aspects. It is designed as an auxiliary discipline that submits its results to the exegetes. It can do so best if the textual data are presented in an easily digestible fashion in scholarly text editions. Thus, all the textual data analyzed above are presented to the users in an abridged form in scholarly text editions. In 2023, we have access to several critical text editions, while important projects are still involved in the creation of updated editions. Saltare. Scholarly editions. A scholar who wishes to examine the scripture data will find it difficult to gather the relevant data from the many textual witnesses since the material is scattered in numerous publications. Furthermore, not everyone is proficient in all the languages of the ancient translations, nor does every reader have sufficient experience in evaluating the evidence. 3 groups of scholarly editions cover Hebrew scripture. It's the BH series, Biblia Hebraica, so that's Biblia Hebraica, Biblia Hebraica Studiotensia, BHS, and BHQ, which is still in the making. Some 9 or 10 volumes have been produced, and in the audience we have people, some 3 volumes are being prepared by scholars in the audience. So that's BHQ, and then we have Hebrew University Bible, HUB. And finally, the so-called eclectic editions. That is, editions that create a completely new text, a text that does not exist, a brainchild of a scholar. Do I like that? I will not give my view here, but a big question mark. But with an apparatus, there's never a question. You can always see what the Masoretic text and the other texts are. So we have different types of critical editions. The special features of these 3 groups of editions are recognizable in the area of 1, the text chosen as the base for the edition. Well, normally we know this as the Leningrad for the BH series, the Aleppo for the Hebrew University Bible, and a novel text for the eclectic editions. And then the second component is the critical apparatus of notes that contains Hebrew variants found in ancient and medieval Hebrew manuscripts and details from the ancient versions, including reconstructed variants. The quality of the edition is determined in the edition and is determined by the judicious selection of these details. The better the choice of the base text included in edition, and the better the quality of the apparatus, the greater the insight gained into the ancient evidence. An important aspect of the critical apparatus of some of the editions is the editor's judgment expressed on the comparative value of the variants and empty. In the BH series, this judgment changed from edition to edition. In the Hebrew University Bible edition, no view on the variants is expressed, while in eclectic editions, the view on the original text are embedded in the base text itself rather than in the apparatus. Which editions to use? It's hard to give a suggestion. They're all open to you. Should you use the edition of the Hebrew University Bible? It's not available for all the books, only for very few books. This is BHQ, available for some 10 books. Both of these editions are extremely detailed, extremely good. They're the best of scholarship. Both of them, I dare say, are not easy to use. At this point, since these editions are incomplete, people use this. But I should say, we all have our problems with BHS, because otherwise people didn't have the idea of starting BHQ. But it's the most used edition. So, but in the meantime, that's what we use. Although we are now in 2023, and our discipline has achieved much in all the so many decades preceding us, but we are not in an optimal situation at this point. What can we say about modern textual criticism? I don't say postmodern. Someone asked a scholar, what is postmodern biblical scholarship? Because I didn't understand what he was talking about. And then he said, Emanuel, you are a postmodern textual critic. I don't think I'm a postmodern biblical critic, but modern textual criticism. I think that one aspect of modern textual criticism is the involvement with literary criticism. When turning to that discipline, we move to a different field. The variants mentioned in the preceding paragraphs are discussed by textual critics who deal with scribe copyists, whose activity produced various textual features in areas pertaining to linguistics, exegesis, historical analysis, geography, and the history of ideas. These details are usually relatively small. On the other hand, at an earlier stage, scribe authors changed many details as they were involved in the development of the composition. This is the area that is dealt with by literary criticism. Literary criticism is a wide field that is based on principles that differ completely from textual criticism. The two disciplines are thus remote from each other and do not overlap. They only converge when coincidentally textual sources preserve evidence from an earlier or later developmental stage of scripture book that differs from that of MT. In such a case, the data are analyzed with textual procedures but evaluated with literary procedures. There is a very practical implication of the evaluation according to principles of literary criticism, since within the latter discipline, one literary layer is not preferred to another. For example, the short edition of Jeremiah, that is the one of the Septuagint and 4Q Jeremiah B and D, would not be preferred to the edition of MT, even though it presumably preceded MT. I was going to talk about, but it's all in your text, about the literary differences between the long and the short edition of Jeremiah. We don't have much time left, and besides, you're going to have a lecture on the text of Jeremiah, especially on the Septuagint text. So I'm free to jump that example. But I will finish with a few words about the evaluation of literary variants. So the difference between the two editions of Jeremiah are, these are literary variants. And I come to the section in your Italian text that's called Evaluation of Literary Variants. This is just below where you see all those Hebrew characters and where you see the section about Yochanan. Evaluation of literary variants. The practical results of the analysis of literary variants are a component of the evaluation process of all the variants textual and literary. In the past, literary variants were analyzed as any other variant, that is, they were compared with the readings of MT, and an opinion was expressed on them. Thus, details in the short edition of the Septuagint of Ezekiel were often preferred to their counterparts in the long edition of MT of that book. However, there's a trend in modern research to acknowledge that literary and textual criticism work with different sets of rules, while textual critics prefer certain readings to others in their search for the best original reading. Literary critics record such differences without preferring one stage to another. This notion was expressed for the first time in clear terms by Wellhausen, and it is most clearly visible in the systems used in BHQ. The BHS edition still expressed preference for literary variants, while the later BHQ edition is open to a notation lit, L-I-T, liter, meaning that a literary variant so indicated will not be evaluated with textual tools. My final word. In the last few decades, textual criticism has become a vibrant discipline in which new discoveries have been made and procedures have been stabilized. The scrolls have given a push for several new developments. It has been realized increasingly that exegetical activity cannot be practiced anymore without consulting all the textual sources, not just MT, especially in certain scripture books. Some guidance is provided in auxiliary tools, but not enough. The most important aspect is to have an open mind for all the new possibilities, sources, and development. This is only the first lecture, and please follow the richness of the lectures to come. Thank you.